Hello everyone, I'm Nayaswami Asha, and it's a joy to be speaking with you this evening. This is the first of 3 parts of a webinar, which is about the mission of the Masters. And what I want to talk about is our particular line of gurus, what this path is about. In a certain sense, this is an extension also of some of the webinars that I gave earlier about Ananda, past, present, and future, which I never really had enough time to talk about all the aspects of it that I wanted to. So I hope in these webinars to be able to touch a little more deeply on the overall work of Ananda as an expression of Master's work. In the Bhagavad Gita, there is that glorious promise from God that whenever virtue declines and vice predominates, I, the infinite Lord, take visible form to destroy evil and to restore Dharma again. And in the Festival of Light every week, we have this beautiful line that says, a prayer of love went up from earth and you responded. Out of the heart of infinity burst downward through night skies of consciousness. A ray of your light descended. I'm not saying it exactly true, but exactly word for word. But that's the sense of it, that there is this responsive power in the infinite that is guiding and blessing and in fact directing the course of human history, of planets, of civilizations, on a level that is far more significant and important than what people think is going on, which I say is really, really good news. The time that this is being recorded, it happens to be October 2013. The government of the United States is in a notable state of chaos and confusion as people desperately try to make what they think is the right thing happen. And it's all, let's say, at the furthest edge, let's pretend it's all well-intended. But it's utterly chaotic and ineffective, and really depressing if you want to think about it. When people talk to me about political things, I'm not politically active. I may actually be registered to vote, but I rarely vote because I don't feel that it's a world I can participate in. I do not know how to step in it and make judgments of one ego-based point of view versus another ego-based point of view. Perhaps some of you feel inspired to participate and to understand and to educate yourself. It's really not my world. But at the same time, I often tell people that I feel that I am intensely politically active in the sense of trying to create a better world, because what I see happening in the world, all the difficulties that people complain about, all of them, are because the consciousness is wrong, the attitude is wrong, the understanding of the nature of life is delusionary. It's not based on everlasting truth. And we can, plug the dike here and there and put a piece of duct tape over where it's cracking on this side. But really what we have to do is we have to pick the whole thing up from the right string. And that right string is an awareness of God's presence within, and an understanding of our relationship to a greater reality, and everything that necessarily has to follow from that simple fact. And so teaching people to meditate and to love God really seems the only answer. In 1986, 87, we went to India for the first time. And I'd never been to what people call a developing nation, whatever phrase you want to use. And in the last so many years, which has been quite a few now, India certainly developed a lot. But looking out the window, I'd never seen overpopulation before. I'd never really seen poverty. But overpopulation was what really struck me. And I thought, there's no solution to any of this with the human mind. The only solution to this has to be divine. And the wonderful thing is now, when we begin to consider, open ourselves to the possibility that we are not in charge, that there is a reality greater than our own ego preferences that we are tuning into and that is really moving this universe, then all of a sudden we discover every reason in the world for hope, and every reason in the world to feel confident that no matter what the ups and downs on the surface of the sea, that the ocean is very healthy and the power of the infinite is very strong, and what is happening it is not at all random, but it is moving forward with all due speed, as fast and as well as it can, given the true nature of this world, which is somewhere between a hospital and a university. It's just a place where people come to learn. We imagine in our minds that Earth is a place where, that Earth is heaven, and it isn't. It just isn't, and it never will be, even in the highest ages. When I was having a conversation with Swamiji once, and he was in a particularly intense state of vairagya, of disinclination for this world. And we were talking about Kali Yuga and Dwapara Yuga, and I just jokingly said, if we're going to incarnate again, sir, let's come back in Satya Yuga. It was sort of like, I feel that the string of my karma is knotted tightly to his, and wherever he was going to be, I would have to be there too. So I said, let's wait, let's come together. I mean, when the next time you come, and I'm going to follow in your way, because I pray to God that I will, let's make it a higher yuga. And Swamiji just emphatically at that moment said, quite simply, I hope never to come back. Now, of course, he's modified that a number of times by saying that he knows himself, and his compassion and concern for us is probably going to drag him back here more than once. I said to him when he said that, I said, that's the only reason you came this time, isn't it, sir? And he sort of looked even slightly sheepish and said, well, there is that. But in any case, he said, even in Satya Yuga, it's still the material plane. He said, the difference is people like us are in charge. I just love that picture. And I said, then the whole world is like Ananda. He said, yes. And that is certainly more comforting than when you watch the House of Representatives on C-SPAN or whatever it is where they put them out now. The thought that the whole world would be like Ananda is a very, very pleasant thought, run by honorable means. Now, coming back to where I was in all of this, this recurring coming of the masters. I'm going to go in a different direction for just a moment. Swamiji was also talking once about how many previous incarnations Master has mentioned in the context of our masters. Rajasi, Saint Lin, James J. Lin, in this lifetime, Master spoke of him as being one of the Pandava brothers when Yogananda himself was Arjuna. He spoke of Babaji being Krishna. He spoke of James J. Lin as having been Rajasi Janakananda, the king, Rajasi, King Janakananda in the previous incarnation. He spoke of Lahiri Mahashaya as having been Kabir. He spoke of Sri Yukteswar being Lanfranc when Master himself was William the Conqueror. He spoke of himself as being a king in Spain when it was necessary to preserve Europe as a Christian nation and drive the Moors out of Europe when it was necessary to do that. He's talked about very high civilizations on the continent of America. But in that context, Swamiji was talking about the fact that sometimes and Swamiji himself has raised the thought very seriously that Yogananda himself was Jesus, and Master himself said that the three wise men were Lahiri Mahashaya, Sri Yukteswar, and Babaji. So you sort of you have an awful long history of these same souls reincarnating to move the project along. And Swamiji said it looks suspiciously like these masters have responsibility for the planet. Swamiji never declared that, but he said he wondered, he said, if different planets have different sets of masters, different lines of gurus that take care of that particular planet and reincarnate over and over again. Swamiji once told us of a fascinating dream he had, which actually takes it a little off of the same point, and it was a dream, I think, that was so vivid that it Swamiji presented as if it was not a dream. It was an experience that happened while his body was asleep. But he said a delegation of people came, and he never actually said what they looked like, whether they looked any different than earthlings do, because he said they were a delegation from another planet. And they wanted Swami Kriyananda to incarnate on their planet, to come with them to their planet, because they needed him as a spiritual guide. Somehow in the cosmos they knew who he was, they found him, and they wanted him to go back with them. Lots of odd things happen on this planet. Master said the fact that there's civilizations on other planets is self-evident, is almost how he put it. The universe, as he put it, is teeming with life. To think that we are the only intelligent civilization is simply not true, Master said. So anyway, this delegation was there, and Swamiji was very sympathetic. They were very sincere, and they seemed genuinely to want and need his help. And he said he was just beginning to agree to go along with them. I'm curious in my own mind, would he have died? Would he have just bilocated? What would have happened? Would it have happened? Was it a civilization so advanced that he could have gone in his astral body and still kept his physical body here? He never explained any of those things, because Swamiji said just when he was thinking he would go with them, he realized, as he put it this way, he sort of sighed and realized, oh, another language and a whole new culture to get used to. And he just didn't feel he had the, he didn't use the word bandwidth, but that was almost what he said. He just couldn't take it on. So reluctantly he had to tell them that he couldn't go. Isn't it just like your mind just, you don't know where you are when you hear things like that. Now, speaking of stories like that, in Autobiography of a Yogi and also in The Path, Swamiji, especially Autobiography of a Yogi is what I'm thinking here, where Master talks about Jesus and Babaji. Now, Master wrote this book in 1946. I love to think about that. It was so early in the Western acceptance and understanding of these things. And Master published Autobiography of a Yogi and just wrote all these things out for people to read. It's very interesting. I've read Autobiography of a Yogi. I really have no idea how many times I've read it by this point. I first read it in 1969, and it just comes around regularly. And still, there's just parts of it where you know that you may have read the words, but you didn't grasp the implications. And Master talks in there about two masters, one with a body, one without a body. And the one with a body is Babaji. And in Autobiography of a Yogi, of course, Master tells the whole story about how Babaji promised to keep his physical body for this entire span of creation. And then the one without a body, without a physical body, which is Jesus Christ, and how the responsibility for the spirituality of the world, East and West, I mean, we're talking about the whole globe. The Masters deal with the globe like we deal with, our front lawn. That's where the realm of their consciousness is. So Babaji is responsible for the spirituality of the East, Jesus for the West. And Master tells us that they have been very concerned about the direction that civilization is taking, especially concerned about the materialism of the West, concerned about the proliferation of weapons of destruction, the possibility of war and race hatreds and various other things that we see all around us. And Babaji and Jesus are very concerned about this. It it's so, I saw this on a small scale in an interesting way with Swami Kriyananda, because he's talked about his past incarnations, and there's a wonderful book called Two Souls, Four Lives, about Yogananda when he was William the Conqueror and Swami Kriyananda when he was King Henry I of England. And then Swami more recently has talked about when Yogananda was the king of Spain and he was again his son in Spain. I always get confused between Ferdinand and Alfonso, but one of them was Alfonso and one of them was Ferdinand. I think Swami was Alfonso X and Master was Ferdinand. But Swamiji is used to being in charge of a country, easily in charge of a country. And I remember a conversation with Swamiji once in which he referred, I have no idea what was going on because I don't follow current events very closely, but there was some never-ending dispute between Israel and its neighbors, and there had been some military action, and Israel had taken possession of the Golan Heights, which is strategically, militarily extremely important, and there was pressure on Israel to give up the Golan Heights. And I remember Swami just making this statement, and it was his tone of voice, Israel should never surrender the Golan Heights. It's just essential for their defense that they keep it. Now, anybody could make a statement like that, but he made that statement as if he were in charge of Israel and actually making those decisions. And many times through the years I've seen Swamiji just behave as if a very wide sphere, whether geographically or in other ways, a very wide sphere was simply the natural realm of his influence. And so it would be, you see, when Master and Babaji are just calmly discussing, both in time and space, the magnitude of their responsibilities. Their responsibilities, Babaji has resolved to keep his physical body for this whole cycle of time. And Master describes him as the avatar for avatars. He rather than acting out one small drama, Yogananda was born in 1893 and he died in 1952. Swami Kriyananda, who's been a critical support for Yogananda's mission for multiple, 3 incarnations that we know of, and probably many others as well, in which Master lays the foundation and then Swami builds the building according to the blueprint that Master has laid out. That's certainly the role that they played in this incarnation, and with William and Henry, and also with Ferdinand and Alfonso in Spain. In any case, that Babaji's scope then is, what I was going to say is that, like Master's incarnation, as even though the impact of it will carry on for millennia, just as the impact of Christ and the impact of Krishna and Buddha carry on for millennia, still the span of the incarnation, it just starts and stops. The little mission it shows like this. But Babaji's in that body, promised not to leave it till this entire cycle is finished. So, what kind of just what kind of a perspective is that? I just kind of had to stop. I couldn't find words for it. To just imagine just taking, civilizations through their cycles over and over, and into Kali Yuga descending, Kali Yuga ascending, Dwapara, all through all the cycles, reaching the crescendo of refined civilization, then the whole thing has to go down again. And at each point, having to understand and offer that which will exactly help the civilization to move, and then the other drama that happens simultaneously, one in front of the other, is that there's always the evolution of individual souls. Even now, in Autobiography of a Yogi, Master tells this story about Babaji's disciples. Babaji doesn't live there alone. Babaji has a band of disciples, highly advanced disciples, sufficiently advanced so that Babaji can say, let us pick up our staff and move, and they dematerialize and go to another peak. So the souls that are with him are self-evidently very advanced souls, but they're his disciples who are there with him, undoubtedly working with him for the upliftment of mankind, because disciples serve. Every devotee has to serve in one way or another. They may not serve necessarily in any tangible material way, but I don't know. They certainly serve by the vibrations of their consciousness. They serve perhaps, in fact, probably, by inspiring receptive souls, by acting through receptive souls, so that the thoughts that people receive, if they're in tune, take them in the direction that Babaji is trying to move the planet. And that we have these stories from Master of the role that he personally played in the events of recent history. When he went through Europe in 1935, he tried to meet Hitler. He tried to make an appointment with Hitler. But because he said the direction of Hitler's fate was not quite determined yet, that he had power, but whether it would go for ill or good, that's how Master explained it. And he wanted to meet him and see if he could influence him toward good. But the meeting was not divinely sanctioned, and it never happened. But then Master said later that when Hitler divided his forces and thus weakened himself militarily, which ensured his defeat, that thought, which was a military error, was put into Hitler's mind by the Himalayan masters. Master said he himself inspired Truman to defend South Korea from the incursions of the communists from North Korea. I heard another story of, at some critical point, and I don't have the historical details exactly, but Stalin set out across Russia on the train to take some military action that would have had very negative consequences for the free world. And halfway across, he had these terrible chest pains and thought he was going to have a heart attack, and he came back. And so whatever action he had contemplated was aborted because of that. And Master said that he had caused that experience in Stalin, and therefore caused the stopping of what would have been a very deleterious event for the free world, the world in which Master has been able to plant this new message of self-realization. So we have ourselves embroiled, interwoven with something quite out of the ordinary. And the more willing we are to just read what's written. These are not like, everything I'm telling you is not like some secret offered only by initiation. These are in Swami's public talks and in Master's books and in many of Swami's books too. But the meditating on the implications of this on a number of different levels, the implications from the point of view of what is the actual mission of these masters, from the implication of where do I fit in and how can I serve, from the point of view of why do I ever worry about anything, and what difference does it make what the President of the United States does? It's just a very thin layer across where the real force is coming from that is guiding our planet. There's much for the devotee to gain here. And going back to where I started to say the destiny of the individual disciples, that was the point that I wanted to bring out. There's such the disciples of Babaji, that's where I was heading when I got deflected from that. I always stop for a minute when Master says this group of very advanced disciples around Babaji, including a few Americans. I just love that thought, including a few Americans. So they must look recognizably American. Is their lifespan the natural lifespan, or are their lives extended even as Babaji's is? Where were they born? Who were their parents? Just like, what is the context of their thinking? Does their having been born in America, in some way give them special responsibility for our country? All of it, it's also very important because even though this is very exalted, and on a certain level there's no choice but to be in a state of awe, it's also our family. It's our father and mother, our guru, our param guru, our grandfather guru. You know, it's our people, our family, our life, and we need to not feel distant from it, but also feel that we're a part of it for the additional reason that I touched on, which is that we have a responsibility in this. The passing of Swami Kriyananda, you know, just when this is being recorded, just a few months ago, right now, because we're in October 2013 at this point, has naturally caused all of us to, who are still here, to have to reorient ourselves just a little bit. Fortunately, because Swamiji is was such an enlightened leader, you know, he's been training us extremely well for a really long time. And I don't just mean that he was almost 87 years old and his body has been failing for a really long time, and it's been obvious for a long time that he was being sustained by grace rather than the natural span of that body. There was no, the power that moved and animated that body was a divine gift. But it wasn't only that, in the sense of Swamiji being so enlightened in his leadership. He was enlightened in his leadership when he was in his 40s, which is that because of his relationship to Master, now and for many incarnations, in this particular role of Master, you might say, laying the blueprint. That phrase is often used by Self-Realization Fellowship in a way that is not as expansive as the way Swami Kriyananda uses it. So let's be more kind and say it's different than the way Swamiji uses it. It's implied sometimes when SRF uses it that things are fixed and that Master himself literally made a list of what needed to be done, and everything that's being done is off of that list. Swamiji's way of describing the blueprint was the principles and the energetic foundation and the vibration of attunement with the divine that Master's throughout his incarnation, that he planted deeply in the ether, literally, as he said. You know, my voice is registered, my words are registered in the ether, and they shall move the West. In the 1960s, when I came onto the spiritual path, came into my independent life from childhood, it was the hippie era, and there was a huge movement toward communal living. Much of it was more hedonistic than spiritual, but nonetheless it was a wave of energy that just swept through my generation and caused us to just sail out in completely different directions than had been done before. And Swamiji just said very casually, yes, of course, that was Master's energy. He was, you know, launching the revolution through whatever instruments could receive, however they were going to receive, the principles that he had put forth. And of course, it's fascinating to appreciate, which has come out more since Steve Jobs died, the extent to which he was connected to Master and to Autobiography of a Yogi. And that man, Steve Jobs, he lived here in Palo Alto, and he lived a mile from our temple and never set foot in it, never connected himself at all, certainly with Ananda. Perhaps he was more connected with SRF, I don't know. But nothing that I've heard about him connects him to any group related to Master, but only to Master himself and to Autobiography of a Yogi. But the connection apparently seemingly was an extremely powerful one. And certainly Steve Jobs has been one of the most influential people on the planet in a fundamental and important Dwapara Yuga way, which is dissolving time and space through technology. And Master's mission was not to recreate the Catholic Church or just sort of take all those Kali Yuga forms and put them back here, get a new self-realizationist pope and send everybody off to isolated monasteries. He wasn't here to recreate the past. We have essentially, except from intuition, we don't know where we're going because everything that we have is Kali Yuga. We can only, when you're in an ascending cycle, as we are, the past is no indication of the future, except, of course, that human nature has a certain consistency. But even on planet Earth, human nature isn't consistent because in different Yuga cycles, different vibrations of consciousness dominate. Different souls are drawn. I've been rereading the book I mentioned earlier, Two Souls, Four Lives. And Swamiji is trying to explain how William the Conqueror from, not Swamiji, Catherine Kaivari, who wrote the book, Kairavi, who wrote the book, trying to explain how William may have appeared, to reconcile the thought that a great spiritual master could be such a powerful military figure as William the Conqueror was. But in Swamiji trying to explain how at different eras a divine incarnation looks different because his consciousness is free, but he has to relate to the culture in which he lives. He has to succeed according to the terms of the civilization that he has to serve at that time. So when we're in an ascending age, all we have behind us is Kali Yuga forms. And so Master has come to do something that we don't even quite know what it is. So when we narrow his mission down to what we can easily identify, well, in the West, spiritual figures make churches. Churches have this kind of organization. Renunciation, monasticism has been a principle, so we're going to do that. We have dogmas, we have this. But that's all what we used to have. And when a master comes, especially when an avatar comes to shift us from one yuga to the other, he's having to put the stamp of new consciousness on every aspect of society. That's why Swamiji's work has been so essential to Master's mission, just as Henry I's work was essential to the work of William the Conqueror and the work of Alfonso was essential to the work of Ferdinand. That in one lifetime, one incarnation, the Master sets the essential vibration, and then those who are in tune with that vibration, and some are in tune with that vibration, and some are in tune with the source of that vibration, then they pick up on that and they begin to innovate. Steve Jobs had an actual connection to Master through Autobiography of a Yogi, and who knows what he felt in his own heart. Nothing that I've read has really spoken to that. It's the external evidence implies. But the vibration, Steve, maybe he was practicing Kriya, who knows, but he picked up the vibration, and the vibration was innovative, the vibration was unified, the vibration was advanced, the vibration is, we can do it. Just so many things where I'm using him as an example because he's such a well-known one and such an interesting one, and so many things that he did were really so consistent with the principles and the vibration that Master was trying to put forward. which is this is a new age and something new is required. We don't look to the past. We just feel from inside what is trying to happen, and then that's how we act. That's what Dwapara Yuga is all about. And I was saying a moment ago about Swamiji, that Master wanted communities, Master wanted education for life. We have this feature that goes out from the Central Ananda website, ananda.org. It's called On This Day in History. I'm sure if you ferret around, you'll be able to figure out how to get yourself on that email list if you want to. A number of people have done a lot of research just from every source that they could imagine. And every day you get a little email that tells you on this date in all the different years that are known of Master's life, what was he doing? And what is so fascinating about it is all the things that he did and how extremely wide-ranging they were. He traveled enormously all through the United States to major cities and minor cities. And he didn't just stand up in Carnegie Hall in New York. He went to the Women's Club of Hoboken, New Jersey, and the Rotary Club of Darien, Connecticut, and to the B'nai B'rith in Cincinnati. It's just, I mean, I'm just randomly making these up, but just the most wide-ranging possibility, and the topics he spoke on. You know, the great masters of India, health and happiness through right living, vegetarianism, yes or no, you know, the power of healing, how to be a success in business, raising happy children. Just, you take the spectrum of life, Master spoke about it. We don't have records of a lot of this, so we don't really know everything he said, but through the disciples who were in tune with him, we do know. So when Master asked Swamiji to write, and Swami said, well, sir, you've written so much, what else is there to write? And as Swamiji said, Master looked shocked at the very idea. Much more remains to be written, is what Master said to him, and Swamiji wrote 150 books. And more than the number, really, is the enormously wide scope. Because what was he doing? He was finding Master's vibration on everything from astrology to child raising to education to money to leadership. You know, I can make the long list. You can make the long list. You can see, look at the crystal clarity. You can look at the Swami Kriyananda website and just look at his CV. You can see all the things that he published, all the things that he did. But he found the vibration, you see. Because the Master doesn't come to, the mission of this Master's, yes, I believe, understanding who Master was and understanding how spirituality unfolds. I think Master's name and the specific teaching of Kriya and all that he did will be known for a very, very long time. The practice of Kriya specifically is one of the things that Jesus and Babaji worked out. That's what Jesus said to Babaji. They don't know how to commune with God anymore. In the West, they have externalized my teaching. So we need now, because it's Dwapara Yuga rising, we need to take it into Dwapara, and Dwapara is not about form. Dwapara is about energy and about consciousness. So Jesus and Babaji together agreed that they would send a messenger to the West who would bring the message of inner communion. And Master was that messenger. Master was the one that would come to the West and plant these seeds. So he will be remembered. And Kriya Yoga as Kriya Yoga will be practiced. But it will also spread, and is already spreading, the influence of his consciousness. And I'm not trying to say that, I'm not trying to personalize it, because there's no person to personalize it with. It's a strange balance, because there is an identifiable soul through which these things flow. But that's not the point. The point is what flows through them. But often when we appreciate the source, it puts us more in tune with the vibration. So you can't just cut one off from the other. Swamiji said at first he didn't appreciate, it took him a while to appreciate how every aspect of what Master did was significant, even and including his personality, who he was on every level. All of it was a teaching. And so how Master carried out his mission, who he was, how he behaved, Swamiji has profoundly lamented and done his best to dismantle what he feels is an aberration that had been creeping into an understanding of Master. He said for certain disciples seemed inclined to want to present Master as more and more of a stern taskmaster. He said he didn't know if it was trying to justify their own sternness or exactly where that was coming from. But there was this desire to make Master seem like a stern disciplinarian who wouldn't take any nonsense from anybody. Well, Swamiji said, of course there's an element of that in that Master came to free us from all delusion. And so one could feel in his presence that what he wanted of us, as Swamiji put it, was nothing less than a complete revolution of consciousness. But he said Master was also the most loving and the most forgiving, the most motherly. He was a mother to us because he knew that was how to bring the best out of us. It wasn't that he compromised with us, but he knew that that was how to give us the courage and the confidence and the understanding. It's very interesting to realize we almost always know what we're supposed to do. The challenge in life sometimes is that we're not certain of our guidance, but sometimes the guidance is just there. But what we lack is the courage and the confidence to go forward and follow it. And one of the things that gives us the most courage and the confidence is when someone else loves you and has confidence in you. When I was writing about Swami Kriyananda, the book, Swami Kriyananda as we have known him, it was a struggle for me to write that book, or to put it differently, it was a struggle for me to figure out how to write that book. Once I figured out how to write it, it was a joy to write. But the process of getting to the point where I knew what was trying to happen was a bit arduous for me. And I didn't have the confidence that I would ever solve the problem. But one day I realized that Swami Kriyananda himself believed I could do it. And I realized that if I trusted Swamiji, I had to trust him also in this. And that it was a very critical realization to move me outside of my self-preoccupation and confusion, which is if he believes in me, then I have to believe in myself. That's why one moment in the company of a saint can be your raft over the ocean of delusion. Because when that saint looks at you, he sees the saint in you. And by definition, what you would call a saint would have to be a truth teller and a truth seer. Would have to be a person whose consciousness is united with that which is. And therefore, what he sees in us, what he sees in the yet unrealized soul, is more true than the way the ego-bound soul sees himself. And it's only the ego that holds us back out of its own desire to perpetuate itself from really just accepting the spiritual greatness which is our true nature. And we think it would be egoic to embrace that greatness, but it's egoic not to. Isn't that an odd sort of the way it works? But in the presence of the childlike joy, the utter self-forgetfulness of the spiritually advanced, we find that vibration. And coming back, this was Master's incarnation, and Swamiji talked about how Master was so secure in his realization. He was not one just rising to that state of freedom. But his own freedom had come to him so many, God knows only how long ago, that Swamiji said he wore it comfortably, like an old coat. Just he was completely at ease in the material world, because nothing about the material world separated him from the divine world. So he never had to protect his own consciousness. And he could live so freely and so easily in this world. Now, that's also part of the mission that he brought. And this is why I say we have to be very careful to tune into his vibration and not merely bring to this new reality our own memories of past lives. Because Master was very free. It's not that he was, and he was very free in the way he lived, and that was what he presented to us. And I don't mean by that he was not focused or disciplined, or was not presenting to us, that he was presenting to us an undisciplined life, an unfocused life. Master was, the ways of realization are not affected by the yugas. And I touched on this, but let me say it again more clearly. The yugas are actually, you see, a physical phenomenon that take place in the solar system and affect those planets. Our sun, Sri Yukteswar explains, has a dual, and our sun carries an elliptical orbit with that dual, carries on, which moves our solar system closer and then further away from the galactic center. The closer we are to the galactic center, the more energy, literally, comes to Earth, and therefore the more energetic and elevated the consciousness and the more refined. There's subtle forces at work here that I couldn't begin to understand or explain. But we incarnate on, Master said, many different planets. He said when it's time for us to incarnate, as he put it, there are many planets to choose from. Swamiji asked him if we always come back to Earth, Are we Earthlings in more than just the times that we're here? Master said, oh no, there's many, many planets to choose from. Again, we don't even begin to know. So, and on all these different planets, presumably are all connected in some way or another to the Yuga system. They're either closer or farther away from the center of their galaxy because of these orbits, which are the nature of the physical world. But Jesus incarnated in Kali Yuga, descending just a few hundred years before the absolute worst, which was 500 years after he died. Things were terrible when Jesus was born, and from there they disintegrated even more. But Jesus was a fully self-realized master, and many very advanced souls came as his disciples, and many of his disciples were liberated because that's what happens, or became liberated, or jivan muktas, or became siddhas during the course of his lifetime. But it was to serve this planet for the responsibility that these masters seem to have. Christianity was one of the reasons that something of civilization was preserved through the nadir of Kali Yuga to begin to come up the other side. And so everything was geared toward that. But nothing about the physical reality of the planet, the consciousness of the planet as a whole, determines the consciousness of each individual soul who incarnates. Full self-realization is the same option for everyone at all times. It just acts out a little differently. Right after Jesus died, people, the desert fathers, became a tradition, which is people just turned their back on society. There was no point. It was bad and getting worse. You couldn't build a spiritual work in that context. There was no place to put it. Those who were really serious about the spiritual life withdrew, and that was the vibration that inspired people at that time, which was to just pull away from society. It was completely different, and to really build walls around yourself, literally, from, you had to wall yourself out from the civilization that was there. And Jesus lived, as a total renunciate. He didn't have an organization. He didn't have a building. He didn't have a temple. He didn't have a very long life either. But, even the foxes have a place to lay a hole for their home. But the Son of Man, the Son of God, Jesus has nothing. He was an absolute renunciate because that was the only way to live at that time. Master goes to Los Angeles and buys an old hotel and renovates it. It's a completely different time. So if we're going to be good disciples to our Master, we have to ask, what is our Master trying to accomplish? What is he trying to do here? And Swami Kriyananda, of course, sets just a stellar example of that, of constantly thinking of, is there yet one more area of society? Is there one more aspect of Master's teachings? Is there one more way in which I can be a channel and lay out in front of people the roadmap in which they can follow the trajectory of whatever their life might be, but in tune with Master's way of thinking? And all of the different areas, they're huge careers in themselves. We've just barely touched it. Swamiji has often suggested that that each one of his books should become a separate ministry. It should have its own department in the publications business, and that individuals should devote themselves entirely to the potential of that particular message. Think about marriage as a path to self-realization. I mean, just think how many different offshoots there could be of that. Training courses for children, for young people contemplating marriage, for older couples. You could do books, you could do seminars, you could have psychological systems, you could do everything just on that. Then let's take art as a hidden message, or of course education for life. Just each thread can be pulled out from the infinite and go on, because Jesus and Master together have planned the salvation for this age. And all of their disciples, starting with Swamiji, who, just like for William, Henry was the one who finished the project. William conquered England, but it took all his energy just to hold it. Henry was the one who was able to build the stable society and build the legal systems and so on, which actually eventually became the legal systems of America. And America became the place where Master incarnated as Yogananda. And America is the place from which this whole work has emanated. It's quite remarkable when you begin to think of it, and there is just no end to the way it spins itself out. So Master also, in this particular incarnation for him, also Babaji and Jesus planned this out, that it wasn't, that the shifting of the Yuga and the globalization and all of the things that had to happen, the re-inspiring of true Christianity, and also equally important, the re-inspiring of the true teachings of Krishna, because Krishna's teachings have devolved into Hinduism, and Jesus' teachings have devolved into Christianity, whereas both of them are Sanatana Dharma, and both of them are self-realization. Master's own statement and definition of what his work is: self-realization has come to unite all religions. Well, some have interpreted that to mean that, this will be the Catholic Church of the coming era. If you've ever visited St. Peter's and have any, you get such a visceral impression when you go to St. Peter's in Rome of just how physically powerful that church conceives itself to be. And it's so the opposite of the subtle non-material vibration of self-realization. And so what Master was saying to us when he said self-realization has come to unify all religions, in a sense what he meant, it's come to pull the essential truth out of all religions. And in that essential truth, everything else will fall away. Swamiji writes it in the book Hindu Way of Awakening, in which he takes on this particular point. He uses Hinduism as an example, but to make the point. And the point is, he said, every religion has its inner reality and its outer form. And the outer forms, he says, are irreconcilable. You know, the Jews won't consider that if you make any statues, it's an offense against God. And the Hindus are just filled with statues. And even if it's a really respectful Jew and a really respectful Hindu, you just can't put those together. It's too shocking. Jews just can't deal with all those statues. They're so trained to think that that's not the right thing to do. But if you go underneath that and listen to the Jewish prayer, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." Judaism is Sanatan Dharma too. There is only one reality, and that reality is divine. That's what that prayer means. All the rest of it is the outer way of worship. But the inner way of realization in every true religion is and must be the same, because we are all children of one God. We are all made of the same divine substance. At some point it must unify. And self-realization has come to unite all religions. Not that Jews will now respect Hindus or be comfortable with the Shiva statue. They never will be. But the truth will be drawn, and we'll see what it is that really unites us. On the external, as Swamiji put it, it's always going to be a compromise. The Jews will never be comfortable with the Hindu statues, and the Hindus will never understand why the Jews don't understand that these are focal points for devotion, and they're not so foolish as to think that statue of Kali is really the feminine, there's really God. It's an aspect. It's just, on the external they can't see it. But heart to heart, in divine communion, we can. That's the vibration, you see, step by step. That's the blueprint Master has planted in the ether, is that vibration of inner reality. This is Jesus's request of Babaji. We have to send a messenger. They've forgotten inner communion. But once inner communion is reestablished, then the mission of the Masters will be fulfilled. Well, fortunately, I have 2 more hours in which I can carry on with this, because as you can well see, there's a great deal to say, and a great deal to contemplate and meditate on, and to take into our hearts and make our own when we begin to contemplate this line of gurus, the mission of the Masters, and our relationship to it as disciples and devotees. God bless you.